The first time I saw her, she was marching across my gravel driveway like she owned the place. Hair bleached to the edge of straw, sunglasses too big for her face, clipboard in hand, classic HOA Karen. Her actual name, Trinette. Trinette Dorsey, president of the Lake Pines Homeowners Association. And she was furious that I was moving into my own lakefront cabin. As I heaved another box out of my truck, she barked, "Excuse me? You can't park there, that's community property. HOA rules strictly forbid blocking emergency access routes." I didn't even look up. "This is my land," I said. "Driveway's on my deed." "I don't think so," she said, tapping her pen on the clipboard. "That road belongs to the HOA. You need to file a vehicle waiver before you unload anything over 30 pounds. It's in the handbook." I finally turned to face her. "Lady, I just bought this cabin." "It's not in your HOA, never was." Her lips puckered like she'd tasted vinegar. "We're working on incorporating your lot into the association. It's part of our expansion initiative." I laughed. "You can't just annex private property." She narrowed her eyes and pulled out her phone. "You're being aggressive. I'm calling the sheriff." I leaned against the tailgate and waited as she made the call, lying through her teeth. "Yes, officer, there's a man here trespassing. He's being confrontational and refusing to leave HOA property." 15 minutes later, a cruiser rolled up. Deputy Kelton stepped out, took one look at me and groaned. "Zayne Whitmore." "Yeah," I said. "Didn't expect to see you so soon, Kel." Kelton had gone to high school with me. He looked over at Trinette. "Ma'am, this guy owns this land. His deed's registered with the county." Trinette's voice shot up an octave. "But he's not in compliance. He's violating HOA policies." "He's not in your HOA," Kelton said, already walking back to his car. "Don't waste our time with this again." Trinette turned bright red. "You'll regret this. You can't just move in and do whatever you want." I glanced at the lake behind her, then back at my cabin, and an idea started forming. See, what Trinette didn't know was that my land included something very important. A narrow strip of shoreline directly between her HOA's private dock and the lake. The previous owner never cared because he let them use it. But I wasn't feeling generous, especially not after what she pulled next. I waited exactly 3 days before making things official. First, I filed a land use restriction with the county clerk's office, citing environmental erosion concerns and private landholder rights. Then, I posted a clearly visible sign at the trailhead leading to the lake. "Private property access prohibited without written consent." I even included my name and parcel number. Everything was done by the book, notarized, and recorded. The very next morning, a golf cart with a faux wood paneling job and gold HOA decals came sputtering down the trail. Inside, Trinette sat straight-backed like royalty, flanked by 2 men in matching polo shirts. One carried a tape measure. The other wore a GoPro strapped to his chest. "You're making a mistake," she announced as she stepped off the cart and adjusted her visor. "Blocking community access to a shared resource is a violation of civil harmony under Article 16. "There's no Article 16 that applies to me," I said, without pausing from tightening the bolt on my new dock sign. "You don't have jurisdiction here." One of her flunkies snapped a photo of the sign. Trinette's voice lowered. "This is going to reflect poorly on you. The members are already upset. Restricting lake access will tank property values." I stood, wiped my hands on my jeans, and looked her in the eye. "I'm not responsible for your members' expectations. You built your dock over someone else's land without a written easement. That ends now." The man with the GoPro started walking toward the waterline, angling his camera like he was filming a nature documentary. "Back off," I said. "That's trespassing." "We're documenting encroachments," he replied. I pulled a laminated copy of my plat map from my pocket and held it up. "The county already confirmed the boundary. You're about 20 feet past it. The next person I catch on this side gets a citation." Trinette squinted at the plat, then at me. "You'll regret isolating yourself from this community." I stepped closer. "I think I'll survive." By that weekend, they were hosting a Lake Unity picnic at the shoreline right up to the edge of my property line. Loud music, balloons, folding tables, the whole show. But not a single person stepped past my new rope barrier. I watched from my porch, sipping lemonade, while a few confused kids pointed at the sign and asked their parents why they couldn't go fishing anymore. Then came the petition. A glossy flyer stuffed into every mailbox on my street, calling for a community vote to reclassify my parcel under HOA jurisdiction. It was filled with dramatic language about protecting shared values and preventing individual disruption. I called the county zoning board and faxed them a copy. The clerk, a dry-voiced woman named Deanne, chuckled after reading the first paragraph. "They don't have the authority to do that," she said. "They'd need your consent and a formal annexation agreement, which, judging by your fax cover sheet, you're not interested in." "Not even a little," I said. A week later, I got a visit from a man in a suit who introduced himself as Calvin Rusk, the HOA's legal representative. He tried charm, first offering to negotiate a mutually beneficial arrangement involving annual stipends and limited access windows. I let him talk for about 3 minutes before asking, "Did Trinette tell you about the septic tank leakage?" He blinked. "What? She knew about it 2 years ago." I got a copy of the maintenance reports from the previous owner. "The HOA's dock runoff system is partially buried on my land, and it's been leaking into the lake. That's a violation of both county code and the Clean Water Act." Calvin's eyebrows drew together. "That's a serious claim." "I've already sent the documents to the Department of Environmental Quality," I said, "and I'm giving them a tour next Monday." He didn't say much after that. That tour happened as scheduled. 2 DEQ inspectors, both in khaki vests and rubber boots, spent an hour walking the shoreline and taking water samples. I gave them copies of the old repair logs and a drone photo showing discoloration in the water near the dock. One of them, a guy named Marcus, asked, "Was the HOA aware of this?" "According to these emails," I said, handing over a printed chain between Trinette and a contractor. "Yes, since November of last year." By Friday, the county issued a temporary dock closure order. The bright red notice was tacked to the pilings, fluttering in the breeze like a scarlet flag of surrender. I didn't put it there. The county sheriff's office did. Now Trinette was the one pacing her property line, arms crossed, talking louder than necessary whenever anyone came within earshot. Her story shifted daily. First, I was a toxic loner. Then I was an outsider trying to destroy the community. Finally, I was a criminal who manipulated the system. None of it stuck, especially after a local reporter, Ashley Lynn, showed up asking questions. She'd been tipped off by someone in the DEQ and wanted to know why a neighborhood dock was leaking sewage into a public lake. I didn't even need to bait her with much. The documents spoke for themselves. Ashley ran the story under the headline, "HOA knew about lake contamination, ignored repairs." It hit the local news site like a thunderclap. Comment sections exploded. Residents started demanding emergency meetings. A few even stopped by my place to apologize for how I'd been treated. One guy, a retired plumber named Rick, brought over a 6-pack and said, "I thought you were just being difficult. Turns out you're the only one paying attention." I laughed. I'd rather be difficult than contaminated. That week, a curious thing happened. The HOA quietly removed Trinette's name from their website. Her contact number was replaced with a generic P.O. box, and a notice went out announcing a special election for new leadership. But I wasn't done. See, I'd also discovered that the HOA had been collecting a lakeside maintenance fee from residents for over a decade, money supposedly earmarked for shoreline upkeep. Only none of that money ever made it to the vendor listed in their newsletters. I called the landscaping company. They'd never even heard of Lake Pines. I compiled everything: canceled checks, fake invoices, bank statements the previous owner had kept out of habit. Then I handed it all to the county fraud unit. The detective I met with, a sharp-eyed woman named Maria Torres, spent 2 hours going over everything. By the end, she said, "This isn't just negligence. This is misappropriation of funds. We'll be investigating." When the subpoenas started rolling in, the HOA board scattered. 2 members resigned outright. Trinette vanished. No more golf cart sightings, no more flyers, no more clipboard. Her house went dark, her mailbox overflowing within a week. Eventually, a moving truck backed up to her garage one rainy morning. No ceremony, no farewell, just silence. And a month later, the new HOA president, a soft-spoken woman named Leanne, knocked on my door with a pie and a typed letter formally acknowledging that my property was not and never had been part of the Lake Pines HOA. "We're sorry," she said. "For everything." I took the letter, glanced at the signature, and nodded. "Took you long enough," she smiled awkwardly. "We've dissolved the lake access program permanently. We'll be rebuilding the dock on our own land." "Good idea," I said. "And make sure your drainage doesn't cross the line this time." She nodded, then paused on the step. "If you ever want to come to a meeting just to keep an eye on things, we'd welcome the oversight." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Because as much as I hated what the HOA had become, I wasn't about to let it crawl back in through the cracks. Not on my land. Not again. The first official HOA meeting under Leanne's presidency was held in the Community Recreation Hall, a beige stucco building that hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in 15 years. I wasn't planning to attend until a neighbor named Celeste knocked on my door with a folded sheet of paper. "You should look at this," she said, her tone tight. It was a notice about a proposed budget amendment. The HOA wanted to allocate over $70,000 to legal contingencies and settlement reserves. No explanation, no breakdown, just a vague footnote that hinted at prior board activity. "Looks like they're trying to cover something up," Celeste said. I slid the paper onto the counter. "Or clean up whatever mess Trinette left behind." She tilted her head. "You know more about that mess than anyone. If you're not there, they'll try to rewrite the whole story." I showed up 15 minutes before the meeting started. The room was already crowded. Folding chairs filled the space, and a projector screen flickered at the front with a placeholder slide that read Community Restoration Agenda. Leanne stood near the podium, flipping through a yellow notepad. She spotted me and gave a quick nod. "Glad you came." I took a seat in the back, between Rick and a woman I hadn't met before. She wore a faded postal uniform and had a quiet, observant way of watching everyone. The meeting kicked off with the usual pleasantries. Then came the budget item. "We're proposing a one-time allocation to address legal liabilities left by the prior board," Leanne said carefully. "It's a necessary step to insulate the community from potential fallout." Hands shot up. A man near the front stood. "Are we being sued?" "No lawsuit has been filed yet," Leanne replied. "But there's an active fraud investigation involving several transactions made under Trinette's leadership." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Another resident asked, "What kind of fraud are we talking about?" Before Leanne could answer, someone at the edge of the room raised a voice that cut through the noise. "Why don't you ask Whitmore?" All heads turned. It was Paul Granger, one of Trinette's old allies. He wore a navy vest with an embroidered HOA seal that hadn't been used since the board changed hands. His eyes locked on me like I owed him something. "You're the one who turned everything into a circus," Paul said. "You think the county just stumbled across those records?" I stood up slowly. "They didn't stumble. I gave them the documents because your board stole thousands from your own neighbors." Paul's face tightened. "Allegedly. The county doesn't issue subpoenas for allegations," I said. "They do it for evidence." Leanne held up a hand. "Enough. This meeting isn't a courtroom." But the damage was done. People had questions now, real ones. A woman in the second row asked, "Where did the money go?" Leanne hesitated. "We believe over $50,000 was funneled into a fabricated landscaping contract. The supposed vendor doesn't exist." "The checks were deposited into a private account linked to a shell LLC." Paul's jaw clenched. A retired teacher named Ellen spoke up. And no one on the board noticed. The treasurer at the time, Paul's wife, signed off on every payment, Leanne said. Paul stepped forward. That's a lie. No, said a new voice from the back. The woman in the postal uniform rose, holding a stack of delivery records. I filed those certified envelopes. I saw the return address. That shell company, it was listed under a P.O. box in Trinette's name. Right here in Lakeview. Leanne took the documents and flipped through them as the room grew still. Ellen leaned forward. So, is someone going to jail for this? Leanne didn't answer, but I did. The district attorney already opened a criminal investigation. Financial fraud, forgery, environmental violations, it's bigger than just HOA shenanigans now. Paul turned to leave, but two deputies entered through the side door. They moved quietly, professionally. One of them spoke to Leanne, who nodded and motioned toward Paul. He froze. Mr. Granger, the deputy said, we need you to come with us. Paul's face drained of color. I haven't done anything. You're not under arrest, the deputy said, but you've been named in a state-level inquiry. You'll need to answer some questions. Silence hung in the room as he followed them out. The meeting ended shortly after that. People filed out quietly, avoiding eye contact. No one wanted to be the next name on a subpoena. Outside, I lingered near the steps. The postal worker joined me. Marcy, she said, offering her hand. I figured someone had to speak up. You did more than that, I said. You helped prove what they were hiding. She gave a small nod. I've been watching them for years, just didn't have the pieces until you stirred the pot. A few days later, the DA's office held a press conference. They announced formal charges against 3 former HOA officials, including Trinette, who had quietly tried to flee the state. She was picked up at a gas station in Missouri, trying to pay for diesel with a canceled corporate card. The charges included embezzlement, falsifying financial records, and obstruction. Trinette's bail was set high enough that she stayed in holding until arraignment. Her mugshot ran on the front page of the Lakeview Observer, right beside a photo of the polluted lake she'd ignored. With the investigation underway, the HOA needed new bylaws, ones that couldn't be abused. Leanne asked me to join the reform committee. I said no at first. I had a dock to rebuild and a shoreline to clean up. But then I saw the list of volunteers: Marcy, Rick, Celeste, even Ellen. People who finally saw the HOA for what it had become and wanted to fix it. So I joined. Our first act was to eliminate the clause that allowed unilateral annexation proposals. Then we added a transparency mandate. Every financial transaction over $500 required public posting within 72 hours. We also established a new election protocol that barred any candidate from running without verified residency and a clean record. The old guard didn't like it, but they were gone now. Their empire of fake invoices and intimidation collapsed under its own weight. As for the lake, the DEQ finished their restoration advisory and coordinated with the county to install filtration barriers along the runoff points. The shoreline slowly recovered. Fish returned. The water cleared one afternoon as I was repairing a section of the dock railing. Leanne stopped by. We're organizing a proper lake day next month, she said. No speeches, just food and kayaking. You're welcome to join. I looked out at the water where a pair of ducks glided between reeds. Thanks, I might. She hesitated. You know, without you this place would have kept sliding downhill. I just didn't want anyone telling me where I could or couldn't park, I said. She turned to go, then paused. Funny how something that small unraveled everything. I didn't reply, just watched the lake, because sometimes justice doesn't come from grand gestures or legal crusades. Sometimes it starts with someone standing on their own driveway, refusing to be pushed. 3 months passed, and the lake was finally starting to look like it belonged to nature again. Reed clusters had grown back where the HOA's cheap gravel path used to cut through. The water kept a steady clarity now, thanks to the filtration barriers the county installed. I'd stopped hearing arguments drifting over from the dock. which had been dismantled down to its rusted bolts and carted off in a flatbed one morning while I was splitting firewood. The HOA never replaced it. Probably couldn't, not after the fines and the sanctions. I was walking around the edge of my property one cool September morning when I noticed something strange: 2 sets of tire tracks in the still soft earth leading down the old service trail. They weren't mine. My truck hadn't been down there since the flood barrier was installed. I followed them, boots crunching over dry pine needles, until I reached the spot where the county had posted their final environmental survey notice. The sign was gone. So were the markers. I crouched and ran my hand over the dirt. Someone had pulled the stakes clean out, then covered their tracks with fresh topsoil. But they hadn't been careful. There was a shredded plastic flag half buried in the mud, bright orange with a county seal still visible. I straightened and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. That evening I called Marcus, one of the DEQ inspectors who'd helped with the lake remediation. I told him what I'd found. "That shouldn't be possible," he said. "Those markers were logged. Tampering with them is a felony under state code." "Are you sure?" "I'm looking at tire tracks and a missing sign," I said. "Somebody came back," he exhaled slowly. "I'll notify enforcement. Don't touch anything." 2 days later, a pair of unmarked state vehicles rolled up my drive just after dawn. A woman in a windbreaker with a badge clipped to her belt stepped out and introduced herself as Special Agent Rowan, Environmental Crimes Division. "We've had multiple reports of marker tampering across the county," she said. "But this one's different. This site has an open investigation tied to a pending criminal case." I led her down to the lakeside trail. She took photos, measured the tire impressions, and bagged the torn flag like it was a piece of evidence from a crime scene. "This wasn't vandalism," she said. "Whoever did this had a purpose." Later that week, I overheard something that confirmed it. I was picking up mail at the local depot when I ran into Walter, an older guy who lived 2 properties over from the HOA's old dock. He shuffled up beside me, eyes darting down the hallway before speaking low. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, "but I saw a boat out there after dark, real quiet, no lights, slid in like they were avoiding attention." "Where?" I asked. "Your side of the lake." "Just past the old runoff trench." I didn't like the sound of that, not one bit. That night I set up a trail cam where the markers had been. I angled it low, tucked it into the undergrowth, and gave it a direct line of sight to the service trail. Then I waited. 3 nights later, it caught someone. I sat at my workbench scrolling through the images, and my heart slowed when I saw the face. Even blurry in the motion lighting, it was unmistakable: Trinette. She was wearing a hoodie with the logo of a landscaping company that never existed, the same one tied to the fraudulent invoices. She was crouched beside the new erosion barrier, holding what looked like a cordless drill. State investigators took it from there. Rowan called me personally. "She's in violation of multiple court orders. That site's under environmental protection. She's not even supposed to be within 500 feet of the lake." "Why would she come back?" I asked. Rowan didn't hesitate. "Because someone paid her to." The next week unleashed a storm the HOA hadn't seen coming. Turns out, Trinette hadn't acted alone. During a joint investigation between the Environmental Crimes Division and the State Financial Enforcement Bureau, agents found emails between her and a former HOA board member, Lyle Corman. He'd stayed out of the spotlight during the initial fraud investigation, keeping his name off most of the checks and never signing anything directly, but digitally. He'd slipped up. The emails detailed a plan to restore private lake access by sabotaging the county's environmental work, removing barriers, destroying survey evidence, even rerouting runoff channels to make it look like the contamination had never happened. They'd hoped that, without visible damage, the county would lift sanctions and allow the HOA to rebuild a dock. It wasn't just desperation. It was calculated. And it was criminal. State police arrested Lyle at his office in the city. Trinette was caught 2 days later hiding in a rental cabin across the lake under a fake name. This time, there was no bail. The charges were upgraded: conspiracy to commit environmental fraud, destruction of state property, and violating a court protection order. The trial was public and brutal. I was called to testify about the landmarkers, the trail cam footage, and the septic leak that started it all. I brought all of it. The photos, the flagged emails, even the GPS logs from the drone I'd used to document the shoreline discoloration. The prosecution's case was airtight. The defense tried to argue that the HOA had been acting in the community's interest. That Trinette was just correcting a misapplied restriction, but the jury didn't buy it. Not after hearing how they'd falsified invoices, laundered funds through a shell company, and tried to erase evidence of ecological damage. It took them less than 2 hours to return the verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge handed down the sentence a week later. Trinette got 8 years in state prison. Lyle got 10. The court also ordered restitution over $120,000 in fines and environmental reparations. The HOA's remaining funds were frozen, pending civil payouts. The community was stunned. People started showing up at my cabin. Some came with baked goods, others with awkward handshakes and stiff apologies. One guy left a note on my porch that just said, "Thank you for not letting them ruin everything." I didn't keep the note, but I remembered the handwriting. Leanne eventually stepped down as HOA president, not out of guilt. She'd done everything right, but because she was tired. She told me over coffee on my porch. "I never wanted to run a political machine," she said. "I just wanted people to stop yelling at each other." "You did more than that," I said. "You stopped to cover up." She smiled faintly. "Still." Time for new blood. The new board was made up of people who hadn't even voted in the last election: quiet professionals, retirees, and a young couple who ran a canoe rental business. Their first vote was to dissolve the HOA's authority over shared lake access entirely. The land would remain protected under county jurisdiction, with no group allowed to build, alter, or claim ownership without express county authorization. It was exactly the kind of outcome Trinette had feared, and exactly what the lake needed. On the first warm Sunday of spring, I took my skiff out. The water was still, the air smelled like pine and old wood, and there wasn't a single sound I didn't recognize. No loudspeakers, no golf carts, no fake security patrols, just birds and breeze. Halfway across, I saw Marcy, the postal worker from the meeting, sitting on a bench reading a paperback. She waved. I waved back. Later that evening, as I locked up the tool shed, I noticed something new at the bottom of my driveway. A small sign, painted by hand, staked into the earth beside the gravel. It read, "Welcome to the lake, be kind, be honest, or be gone." I didn't ask who put it there, I just left it. Sometimes the right words don't need attribution, and the ones who needed to hear it, they weren't coming back.